Welcome back, my fellow Summit Chasers, to another episode of the Summit Chasers podcast, where we make business success simple so you can live extraordinary. I'm your host, Zach Carlin. Today, we have a truly, I'll say, exceptional guest joining us today. But first, really quickly, make sure if you haven't already, get your tickets for the Young Professionals Leadership Summit. That is in Toronto, October 19th. You can make your trip there in person. Toronto in October, especially if you're from some of the southern states, it might be a little crisp for you, but the dollar is great for Americans right now in Canada. So if you want to make your trip there, absolutely, being in person these events, you can't replace that experience, getting challenged, getting to meet some of the speakers themselves and getting to pick their brains in person. But if you can't make the trip, totally fine. You have virtual tickets that you can purchase as well. And again, if you're somebody who's new to leadership, this isn't priced like some of these other conferences that you'll see. These aren't $2,000 a ticket. They're $60 a ticket online, for in person, $20 a ticket for virtual. So get your tickets now. You can go to yplsummit.com. That is yplsummit.com. I'll put the link in the description below so you can go get your tickets. Now, on to the task at hand. I am thrilled to introduce Edgar Baum. I hope I should have asked you how to pronounce your last name earlier, but introduce Edgar Baum, the CEO and founder of Avasta, a trailblazer in the world of business valuation and strategy. With a remarkable career spanning over a dozen industries, 4 continents, Edgar brings a wealth of knowledge in business valuation and the ability for business owners to get top dollar for their businesses and to look at the value of their business from a different lens and maybe a more valuable lens. With a background that includes finance roles in Merrill Lynch, Procter & Gamble, and a track record of founding several and leading several successful valuation and finance firms, Edgar he's a true expert in his field. He's also an educator, teaching the finance of brand management at University of Toronto and speaking at conferences worldwide. Today, we're going to dive into some crucial topics for small to medium-sized business owners, so yours truly, understanding business valuation and what you can tangibly do to increase the value of your business. So I welcome to the stage, Edgar. How you doing, brother?
Hey, pleased to meet you. Thanks, Zach.
Absolutely.
And listening to the Toronto part, being from Toronto, being in the second half of October, it's a hit or miss. You can either get some really great weather, but you'll definitely get great company. So
that's perfect. That was a great way to say it. Yeah. That's what I was saying, because we were looking at getting food trucks for that event.
There's a growing food truck scene here. It's not the same as like the U.S. South, which is a really great food scene for trucks, but that's another day.
Well,
another topic.
Really good options. That's another topic. Yeah, we'll do another podcast for that. So we have some really great options, but again, I'm the only one. The guy that we partnered with, he's in Toronto as well. A lot of my team, they don't quite understand Canadian weather, and October, probably more than almost any other month, maybe October, November, more than any other month, it's a flip of a coin. It could be perfect, it could be gorgeous, or it could be you can't go outside unless you have 8 layers on and snowshoes and chains on your tires and your cars are plugged in. So you never know. But we're
Toronto is usually pretty safe. I would say it's call it the more warmer place. Like Victoria and Toronto are typically the ones that kind of get away with I would say the warmer weather in terms of Canada. But yeah, you can, Canada's deceptive. You can definitely be in a deep freeze at the end of October, even if you're in southern Canada. So I feel you on that part.
I'm from Alberta, so we right along the Rocky Mountains, right along the border of BC and Alberta. So it is, you never know what the weather is going to be like. You can wake up and from 7 a.m. to 10 a.m. it's one thing, and then at noon everything's melting and your ears are popping and it's crazy. But anyways, we're not here to talk about the weather. We're here to talk about how these business owners can increase the valuation and look at their valuation, look at the value of their business a little bit differently. So why don't you, let's start out here. Tell everybody a little bit about your experience and why they should be taking your advice and why your takeaways are going to be so valuable for them today.
Appreciate that. I think what I want to start with is what I want the listeners to kind of take away from being on your show. And I think one way to look at it is you want to have a different understanding of why your business has value and use it as a way of how you would go and interact with your prospective buyers. And these are principles that I think apply across different sectors. And I think it's about going and understanding how to manage your own expectations and how to communicate your strengths. And I'll kind of give a bit of a background of I think how valuation has changed. I've been involved in valuations for over 2 decades. a lot of the time being very frustrated by what I would call stock valuations, where people just go and follow a specific formula. And that to me is extremely frustrating, because it takes out the essence of why the business is become successful in the first place to be worth selling. And the other aspect of it is to kind of reflect what I think has really changed in the 21st century about valuations. So, feel free to use me as you see fit on today's call and our conversation, actually. And for folks that are listening and you want to hit me up after, Zach will share the contact details, add me on LinkedIn, on Twitter /X, and I'm happy to answer some questions out loud.
Beautiful. And we'll definitely be putting all those links down below. And I'm glad that we put that at the beginning of the podcast rather than at the end, so more people will be able to see that and understand that they can reach out to you and ask some of these questions. So we'll start here then. Let's talk, and you kind of hit on a little bit how the idea and how we've come up, or what the legacy. I think that's one thing that you called it, the legacy measurements of valuation. What are some examples of these legacy methods, and how are they now becoming, I don't want to say obsolete, but maybe less effective today?
Yeah. So I'll kind of give you an example. My origins in valuation started in the early 2000s, actually, in fact, in the late 90s. And back then, there was a lot of, call it, industry norms. And what people would go and do is they would go and take a look at your business. They would take a look at your financial performance. They would take a look at your revenue growth, what were your margins, what's your profitability, how much cash you generate. They would take a look at typically like the last 3 years of financial performance. They would ask you for your 2 years of projections, and they might kind of do some analysis on it. And then they would kind of step back and they would go and take a look at, okay, well, what is the industry going? Like, what's the outlook that we think that is there? And what I really went and learned was how much of this was actually gut feel put into numbers. Because people would go and take a look at like some kind of a benchmark. Oh, like, in our industry, we don't really sell for more, we don't really buy for more than 6 times EBITDA. Or, maybe 8 times cash flow. And what it really was is like, okay, so you expect to make your cash back if nothing happened to the business for the next 8 years, and then you're going to go and take the surplus after that. But what I always found fascinating in all these valuation conversations was, but what can this business turn into? And the big divide that I always saw was private companies would be bought for a few times multiples of EBITDA, but public companies would be at 15, 20, 30, 40 times EBITDA. And I always, or earnings, however you want to kind of go and, cut the pie. And I always went and wondered, like, okay, so what's that threshold? Like, why is there such a severe discount to privately held companies? And a lot of it is because people actually got into the trap of valuing themselves at industry norms that are decades old under a different scenario. And the norms have fundamentally shifted, that is there. And a couple of things that I've kind of go and put into what has really evolved over the past 25 years in valuation, which not talked about enough, not into the formal valuation practices, but I encourage everybody that I work with to kind of consider is, how kind of digital or internet friendly is your business? And it doesn't mean that you're making your money online. It's, can you get your customers online? Can you go and get your customers to perpetuate the strength of your business that is there? I know that many of the listeners that are here are owning or running or considering buying companies that are probably 2.5 to say $50-60 million in revenue. Those are organizations that I've worked with throughout my career. It's somebody that we go and serve at Avasta on a regular basis. And what always happens in those companies is you need to understand, where will your customer continue to come from? And you need to be able to articulate that. We're past the era of just looking at your financial statements as the basis of your valuation. I think that's probably one of the biggest errors that I'm going and seeing people make, is that they kind of take that as a default, and then they either argue with it because they don't agree with it, because they think, oh, my business is worth so much more than this piece of paper, or they never bother trying to understand it from the perspective of the buyer to be able to figure out, well, why is this buyer even interested in buying what we're going and selling? So there's a lot of different moving pieces that I think are there. And I go back to, one of the most critical things that's there around valuation. You are worth only as much as what somebody's willing to pay for you.
Yeah.
Right? Like I love seeing Facebook Marketplace ads, or it's like $800 or best offer, and it's like, okay, well, are you going to take the best offer if it's $80? Right? So you got to kind of figure out, like, what's your floor? Like, what are you like? I won't sell this thing, right? I will shut the business down before I will sell it below this price. So those are the things that are there to consider. So that's where I'm going to kind of come from in our conversation today.
No, I like that. And the one thing that you hit on, and I think it's so common, even with our clients, is very common, because we work with a lot of clients who want to exit at some point or are planning on exiting soon, and they're in the throes of setting their business up so they can, is this disconnect between what somebody's willing to pay for your business and their perception of what they perceived as value in your business, and then what you're perceiving as valuable in your business. Why your definition of why your business should be sold at X multiple or X valuation, and their perception is why your business is worth X, Y, and Z. What are some of the biggest disconnects, I guess, between the seller and the buyer from that standpoint?
It's a great question. So I'll kind of go back to the role that you need to almost play with yourself when you're selling. You need to kind of take yourself out of the picture and look at it. Okay, what if I was trying to buy my company? Because what's going on is the buyer is thinking of, I'm about to pay something for your company because I think I can do something with it after.
Okay.
Right? So they're buying the future. What I think is a lot of companies are going, as a lot of owners that are trying to do, and when they're trying to sell the companies, whether it's a single founder or a group of founders selling a business, is they're trying to sell what this business can optimally be. And you should pay for what this can optimally be, but they don't back it up, or they don't have the data in their organization to be able to go and demonstrate that, yeah, like this is a easy pathway for getting to the other side of the sale. I'm happy to kind of dive into an example of having gone and done that before.
Please
that
do.
helps. Yeah. So I think for clarity, I'm not actually going to share the name, but I was working with a prominent, well-recognized brand a number of years ago, and the founder was looking to exit, and he really had it as like our company is fantastic. I'd like to retire. I'll still help the business for a few years, etc. And we're just nowhere close to our potential in the marketplace, right? Like there's so much demand for what we go and do, and we're worth tons of money. And people would come from the traditional valuation point of view, and they'd take a look at his financial statements the past 3 years. They'd look at, well, the projections for the next 2 years don't really look much better, Zach. Like what are you trying to go and sell here? Like this thing's really not worth that much. And he's like, no. Like all you need to do is like do this in the business and do that in the business and do this in the business, and all of this money's going to roll in from the demand that's out there, right? And we're not talking like hundreds of thousands of dollars. We're talking hundreds of millions of dollars as part of this transaction. And so one of the questions that he was getting back to him was, well, why haven't you done that already? And you have to answer that question, right? And why he hadn't done that already is because he'd never built up enough cash to go and do it. Like he needed like big thresholds of cash to take advantage of the next opportunity. It would be like the people who are going and buying up real estate. It's like, oh, I just need to go and buy like a 6-unit building, and then the cash flow is really going to flow in, but they haven't gotten up enough for the deposit to go and do so, right? So the idea is sound, but the ability to execute isn't there. And what ended up happening with this company was we ended up going and validating, like pulling together the data that yes, in fact, that if they expanded where they were selling their offer, that people were ready to buy. In fact, they were looking for them to come and show up locally. And the reality was our client just didn't have enough capital to go and open up new locations in all these different places where people wanted to buy. So we were able to articulate that value. And what it ultimately went and said is like, look, you're going to buy this business. And let's say you buy this business for $15. Okay. And all you need to do as the buyer, is just put in an extra dollar over the next few years to fulfill on meeting the demand that's in the market. And you should be able to walk away with a business that's worth $25.
Got it. So if the seller can then prove that with data, back that up, that will then increase the value of their
Uh,
business.
absolutely. Absolutely. And another way to go and take a look at it is, and that may not be the case in terms of what you're going and dealing with your business. So
Mhm.
you might be going and saying, hey, we've been running this business $4 million a year. We make, 800,000 bucks cash pretty reliably. It's stable. And what is there is that you may have built up a really good reputation, but
Mhm.
you may not have had personal ambitions to expand the business to a
Mhm.
larger geography or a different industry or a different customer type, right? Like you could have been running a great commercially focused business that always had residential buyers that were interested, but you're like, I don't want to go through the trouble.
Yeah.
But the reputation is there. So you got to really figure out is like, what are people buying you as the founder? Are they buying your business, which is like what your
Mhm.
employees and staff or technology or unique service that you've developed? Like, why are they buying?
Mhm.
The last thing that you actually want to go and put in front of a buyer is the financials. I know it seems so
Mhm.
silly because it's the first thing that they ask,
Mhm.
but what it really needs to be is the last piece that you show,
Mhm.
because people don't buy financials
Mhm.
if they're actually trying to buy your business. They're
Mhm.
trying to buy your future
Yeah.
because they think that they can gain greater benefit from it on top of whatever they pay for you
Mhm.
than if they went and did something else. So they're
100%.
valuing your strategy.
Mhm.
The shorthand we use is your financial statements as a reflection of that strategy working. But if they
Mhm.
can't see a more valuable strategy after buying you than what you've been executing on,
Mhm.
then you're never going to go and get the money that you're looking for. Does that
Mhm.
help?
Big time. What are some other examples? Because you hit on some two really good examples. Actually, I think one I was thinking of in my head, but that one example of future opportunity. If we had this much more cash, we could take advantage of these opportunities, which then could expand our markets. And here's all this huge opportunity that you are buying right now.
Yeah.
Well, other example that I bought a couple health and wellness facilities here, and I got very good deals on them because I could see an opportunity where, okay, if we implemented some marketing, we could expand huge, right? So there's
Yeah.
another example. So what are some other examples of those, just for like the business owner to be aware of some of these gaps that maybe they have or they're not seeing themselves, that would, could allow them to kind of look at these places. Okay, if you just put in a little bit of marketing here or put in a little bit of, a sales process here or whatever it is, right? The opportunity is so much higher. So then that increases the valuation. What are some other examples of that?
Great question. So I'll kind of throw a few different things that are in here to look at. This is why information and data I think is so critical. Several years ago, I was working with a couple of yoga studio brands,
Okay.
which and as you know, that has had like a big spike in terms of demand, and then there was a kind of a drop off. And one of the things that was kind of going on at the time and working with these people is I was like, you got to go and take a look and see how far will people go for a yoga class, and where do they go for a yoga class. And you got to be really conscious of like, is there enough demand, or is it too saturated? And what
Hmm.
we were able to kind of identify is that people wanted to go and open up yoga studios where it was convenient for them to open up a yoga studio, not for where the customers were.
Yeah.
So the reason why they were struggling is that there's too many yoga studios in the area. They couldn't get enough people to come to the yoga studio because the
Yeah.
customers who were interested were too far away, but they themselves weren't interested in kind of going to those areas. So you got to find out where the customer is.
Hmm.
So that's kind of like, I think, like one example that there is to go and take a look at. The second example is to go and take a look at, it's like, hey, I have a credible business, and other businesses like mine are insufficiently available in other
Hmm.
markets, right? So you're talking about like the health and wellness piece. It could be, it's like, hey, you know what? There's a section of the city here or this other state or province or whatever where they don't have this type of thing. Like, and like
Hmm.
they got a critical mass of population, purchasing power, whatever it may be, and they just don't have it. And it's like, so how do we go and open up into that area unknown,
Hmm.
but still be able to be successful from the beginning? And part of it is doing that data, finding out the customer demand, doing the site tours, like really like be there, engage with the consumers or the customers, depending on whether you're selling to people or businesses. Well, businesses are run by people, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And then leverage the credibility that you've gone and built in a different geography or a different
Mhm.
industry. To your point about the marketing side, And it is, what is the ability to transfer my credibility or my reputation? Like, this is called the kind of like the brand that you've gone and built up, and it could be tied to the founder, it could be tied to the business. And you know, I teach the finance of brand management. I've gone and done brand valuations, and which is tied to corporate valuations. And I think a lot of smaller businesses don't actually give enough weight to the brand and reputation that they've spent years or decades building up, and how to responsibly hand it over to the next ownership. So this kind of goes to, if there's an unmet need in the marketplace, you go in and fulfill that. Or you recognize that there's too much saturation in the marketplace, and you're like, I'm actually not going to enter this market right now with my business. So the yoga studio is like one example. Another one that kind of comes to mind is working with a local coffee brand that was there, and that local coffee brand, their struggle was, you know, how many more places can we go and enter? Because like, you're competing with Starbucks, you're competing with Dunkin', you're competing with Tim Hortons. And one of the things that they went and took a look at was just, they observed, they did research, like basic research for 3 months. They went and scouted out what was happening at the Starbucks, what was happening at the Tim Hortons, what was happening at the Coffee Time, what was happening at the kind of like some of the other local single locations, and they kind of got the ebb and flow. So they didn't get stuck in the abstractions of the numbers and the financials and et cetera. They actually went and looked at how consumers behaved, and they built up that data. In their case, they went and used it to raise money to open up that location. But it's the same principle as if you're trying to go and sell your business. So the act of validating your business model, especially your growth potential, increases the value of your company. It's not just what you've gone and delivered. It's being able to demonstrate we've validated what this business can go and do, and we've just chosen to operate it at the current level, but the potential is substantially higher.
And if you had found a way to hand over that potential, that drastically increases the valuation too. And that, when my first business in Vegas, anyways, my second business in Vegas, we had a health and wellness facility where I was more of a executive wellness facility in Las Vegas. And the difference between the offers we were getting when we included our SOPs, especially our new client acquisition SOPs, and when we just handed over the equipment and the building, it was shocking to me, right? Because I mean, in my mind at the time, I was a little bit less savvy than I am now, a lot less to be fair. I don't want to get into that, but in my head, I was handing over a bunch of pieces of paper, right? Like all the shit that we wrote down. In my head, we were just handing that over, but it was all of our scripts, all of our SOPs, all of our, even like down to like how we ran ad campaigns and how we ran challenges, and I created an entire executive coaching platform. And when we handed that over, it was like triple like what people would offer for it. It was
because you've solved their business problem for them. How do I run this thing? Like I want to kind of really emphasize this. I am from the school of thought that when people buy companies, they're not buying them for what we traditionally think of them as assets. Like if you have a company with a business location that you own or equipment that you own, they don't want to buy the equipment. They don't want to buy the location. They want to buy the cash flow that those things generate. Right? So if you have a process that makes your location or your equipment much more effective to reliably generate cash, they'll pay a premium for it. You've gone and figured out a training program or a hiring program for employees that makes them more efficient or more effective at generating cash, they will pay a premium for it, because they don't want to go through funding the failure to make it as effective as it is. Keep in mind, people are buying businesses because they're a demonstration of success, or because they're a demonstration that they've done the hard work to make the next phase of the business successful. And I go back to, get your understanding of why you are valuable before you put forward the financial statements. If that makes sense. Now, if you have bad financial statements, don't bother. But like you need to be able to back up the business with what you've gone and done on the financials.
How much of a role does a company's perceived ability to expand their niche or bolt on services or product to their current niche, how much of an effect does that play on valuation? So, is for everybody listening, if I give you an example, like if you like HVAC, we were just talking before we hit record on how popular HVAC companies are right now for acquisition. Let's say you have an HVAC company, but you maybe also have another warehouse that's part of the deal that has the ability to expand or
Apologies, I just lost you there for a moment, Zach.
Oh, am I back?
Yeah.
We got a storm brewing outside, and I use Starlink, so this could be interesting, which is totally fine. How much of a role, I'm not sure what you heard, but how much of a role does your ability to, or your business's ability to expand its niche, bolt on other products and services, how much of a role does that play in increasing your valuation, or does it?
It really depends, I think, on the industry that's there. And what you're pointing to is something really interesting, which is kind of what's the role of the reputation that your business has or the brand has of people trusting it to go and make purchases that actually has nothing to do with why the trust was initially built. And this is kind of what I call the irrationality of the role of brand and reputation to let you sell products and services that you have no right to sell. Okay, so let's go and use your wellness example, right? That you went and had, right? You bought these clinics, you created these processes to be able to go and have them be really, really effective. And then people come to you, Zach, and they go and say, you know what, Zach, like this is amazing. Can you do this with a car dealership? And you're like, I don't know anything about selling cars. But they're like, but Zach, you know how to be able to go and set up processes for people to deliver good customer experiences better. And you're like, yeah, I guess I do. Right. So you need to be able to kind of demonstrate what that transferability is. And that, by the way, is the big acquisition thesis that is there for organizations. I was working with a company several years ago, one of Avasta's earliest clients. And it's like right in that sweet spot as a company, right? It was this family-owned business. And this is an example, exactly, I think, what you're kind of pointing to. Okay. So it's a multi-location family business, sells to consumers and businesses. And they were competing with like other regional brands, other local brands, and then like national brands. And this is why getting the right data that is at the level of your operating model is so critical. Because when this business got bought, the point of reference that they used was national data for their industry, because that was the only data that was readily available. So on a national data point, this not even like regional, like I would say like hyper regional company didn't register anywhere. Okay. But it had good financial statement fundamentals, right? It had a good real estate base, etc. And so the business got bought. And for those who are aware of M&A transactions, like buying and selling of businesses or mergers, there's a certain amount of information that you get when you're making the purchasing decision. And they might share a ton of information. But if you really think about it, it's an idea of the business, right? You're looking at financial statements, you're looking at those process reports, those training manuals. It's still the idea of the business. And then what you kind of get, like, is the term was like, oh, then we actually got to look underneath the hood, right? So you get the business, you look underneath the hood. So the buyer looks underneath the hood, and they're like, oh my God, this company prints money. Like they are like in the top 5% or 10% in our industry at generating revenue per square foot. And they're like, we don't know why. Like we bought because it's doing well, but they didn't understand the extent to which it was performing. So we were brought in, we were helped them understand. And what I can kind of tell you is they were a brand that was family owned, and like long, like multi-generational training that was going on. Like, I don't mean like 75 years, but by multi-generational is like they would hire a guy in his teens or a gal in her teens. She'd work with them, they'd get trained, they'd become the manager, they'd become like the regional person. Like they were vertically integrated through the business. They got to know the customer.
Mhm.
But almost all of their competitors, especially the other regional and the national brands, were all franchises.
Okay.
Right?
Mhm.
So who has skin in the game at that point? The
Mhm.
franchise licensor,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
To a certain extent, like the person who's licensing it. So what was interesting was they went and became the only kind of um, service provider in their industry where
Okay.
everything else was transactional.
Mm.
So they had built up this massive reputation
Mhm.
about the fact that everybody who was there got exceptional training, customer service. And so the buyer was looking at it and they're like, we really bought this thing for the real estate and because it was profitable. And
Mhm.
they had thought that the business was profitable. This is a retail business. They thought that it was profitable because of the real estate and the location. What we were able to explain to them by going to their consumers and their business customers is
Yeah.
they were profitable, really profitable, because they were the only ones who gave a damn
Imagine that.
relative to the alternatives that they
Yeah.
could go to. And we're
Mhm.
like if you guys kill this thing, like if you turn this into a franchisee business, you're going to chop off 30% of your value right off the bat.
Mhm.
And they're like,
Mhm.
whoa, we don't want to do that. Right? So this was understanding like why does your company make money? And by the way, this is a universal question that drives me absolutely crazy. I talk to large companies, I talk to small companies. It's a problem I've had to deal with myself running my own company. But like,
Mhm.
why does your company make money?
Mhm.
And you got to answer that question before you start selling your business, before you start valuing your business. And I've worked with large multi-billion-dollar companies where
Mhm.
the leadership team, they don't know why they make money.
Mhm. Yeah, and that is it's so funny that you bring that up. So now it kind of validates to me even how common that is, where a lot of businesses they don't even know what their competitive advantage is. They just think, oh, this is
That's
just the way
exactly
we,
it.
we do things. And
Yeah.
I've worked with a few businesses where they're especially in their current local markets they do absolutely amazing. Like it was a great example that you gave where they outshine some of these more franchisey bigger companies because they're able to provide better service, or they're
Yeah.
able to provide just a little bit better product, or maybe they're a little bit quicker in some areas or whatever it is. But if you ask them why they're successful, like, we work hard. Like,
Yeah.
we've been doing this a while. Like, there's just the way they've been doing things, so they it's just almost a blind eye to it. So being really really clear and understanding what your competitive advantage is before you go into any type of acquisition valuation scenario. I mean, I'm so glad that you were able to put a cherry on top of that because it's so important. Go ahead.
So I'm going to actually add to something. You just said something
Please
that
do.
reminds me of, I think, what is a very critical thing to do. Like, there's the question of why does my company make money? Or why does your
Mhm.
company make money? And really being able to answer that. It
Mhm.
is just as critical to answer what would we have to do for us to
Mhm.
lose money?
Oh,
Right? Like
elaborate.
I always go into the other side of like what would we have to do to lose why we make money?
Mhm.
And I'm going to go back into the coffee example. I'm just like like just entrenched in coffee at the moment because we just ran an industry study on the coffee franchises sector as to like trying to explain why different coffee chains are performing well or not. Um,
Mhm.
and just one of the things that's always there is to go and take a look at it. Like some of the listeners that you have are going to be familiar with the Tim Hortons brand. They got acquired by a big private equity firm, and one of the big problems that has happened is that like just there's been a general rise in dissatisfaction amongst consumers. It had like this deep emotional, experiential, reputational brand bond for a lot of people in Canada and parts of the United States, and I would say other pockets of the world increasingly as well. And then they really kind of started skimping on a lot of stuff. Like they started replacing existing equipment with cheaper versions of them that didn't perform as well. And like just very very quickly, the thing started going downhill. And then we did an analysis on like other brands, like Caribou is a brand that you might go and recognize, and
Mhm.
they're just
Yeah.
not doing as well on a going forward basis. That even though in their kind of core markets they have a reputation, they would just kind of show up in these other geographies, open up a location, and think that just because of their look, their feel, etc., that and their success in other areas that they would be
Mhm.
successful in the new one. but they never actually went and understood if there needed to be any kind of tailoring or communications or introduction of themselves into the community. Because oddly enough, except in the very rare cases of, call it, the heavy duty traveler, local is actually coffee is actually a very local personal consumption. Um, we did work for a major coffee brand a few years ago where we went and identified why there was such a different performance at different store locations that were miles apart. And it all had to do with what had people relate to it as their store versus the brand store. And if it was their store, it was more profitable. If it was just another store with the same branding on it, they would just go there because they wanted to get their coffee or their food or whatever it was. But at the minute that they related to it, like, this is my location, the higher the concentration of this is my coffee shop, the better it performed. And it explained the profitability of this chain by location way better than any other metric they came up with.
Yeah. So, this could lead into a whole marketing conversation of,
one of the most undervalued aspects of valuation is to demonstrate what is the long-term value of your marketing efforts. And if you haven't been marketing, you better find out what has been happening about you in the absence of you marketing.
Yeah.
And that's online reviews, word of mouth, etc.
Well, and especially businesses like that, it's your return customer base. Like, you create that culture, you create that client identity with your brand, where you, like you just said, this is my coffee shop. I'm going to go down to my coffee shop. They don't even say the name of your coffee shop. It's just my coffee shop. No matter what, they're your customer for life. But again, that's a whole other topic. And you really hit a soft spot. I'm not going to lie, Edgar, because since I've been back in Canada for the short time that I have been, Tim Hortons really has let me down. I'm not going to lie, because I haven't been back to Canada in 6 years, and in that time they got acquired by the PE firm. I think Burger King had something to do with it too, and it's just not the same. It's just not the same, because it was such a, going back to like this brand and how that equates to evaluation. Tim Hortons had such a strong, proud Canadian brand and message and identity. And you can see where it, at least right after the acquisition, right after the whatever the acquisition was, I don't know who it was. You would know better than me, but there was like a big cliff that it did fall off of, because it lost sight of what made it successful to begin with. And that was again, when I went there, I felt like I was drinking Canadians coffee. I felt like I was going to Tim Hortons' house, right? And Tim Horton is a person. He was a hockey player. I felt like I was going to his place, right? And he was serving me coffee, and that was a big thing with Tim Hortons. And then it just
that part's gone. And like, look, there's a lot of, like, like I think one of the best examples for me, I kind of have it from an Americana point of view, is there was, I would almost kind of say, like almost like a religious or ritualistic approach to car purchases that was there for decades in the US, right? Like, I remember running into people like, we're a Dodge family, like, we've bought Dodges for 55 years. And I'm like, wow, okay. And then that trust was kind of broken. I think it started with the 80s. Then I think there was other challenges, as like some American manufacturers just weren't up to par with what people were looking for, because they stopped being contemporarily relevant to what people want. And I kind of want to kind of bring another aspect of valuation, which is not showing up in traditional valuation approaches, which is the role of your brand and your reputation, or kind of like, I call it the big B brand about your company that is there. Because it's not like the naming or the logo or whatever the heck that is there. On a trailing basis, your reputation as a product manufacturer or seller or retailer or service provider, that kind of, your reputation is like, what have you reliably been delivering? And but that is not enough to sell value on your business. What you also need to understand is what your brand on a forward-looking basis, and that is essentially an expression of your business and the way you run your business on a forward-looking basis, which is relevancy. And that relevancy is not just like, functional relevancy of like, oh yeah, I need a place with a good coffee shop. It is a relevancy of an ability to kind of express the emotional side, or the ability to like relate to this place for myself that's there. And if you look at, like, going back to the car manufacturing side, like call it the basic building blocks of what I want in a car was no longer being served. And people would drag that emotional and nostalgia association as long as they could. And eventually they're like, this car sucks. I'm going to go and find something else. Right. And you go and take a look at what's happening with Tim Hortons as an example. It's the same thing. Right. It's like, my habits, like I don't want to change my habits. I want to come and get this experience. So going back to the valuation conversation about this is, what does your business have that is carrying that reputation forward into the future while also maintaining whatever are the wants or needs of relevancy in the future? Nostalgia can't be enough. A great experience for 20 years can't be enough. Well, it was the best in class 15 years ago. Can't be enough. Are you good enough today? You don't need to be best in class, but are you good enough and got everything else covered? Because then you'll be the best choice in the moment for those buyers. And that, to me, I think, is that evolution of valuation that I find is really misunderstood, not given enough credence, and why I kind of go back to, as critical as the financials are, they're the last thing that you want to go and present. And I would also assert is, if that is like the first thing that people are looking for, they may not be who you want to sell to.
Yeah. No.
Right. So that's just I'd kind of put that in as a caution as well for folks listening to this that are wanting to figure out, who do I want to sell my business to?
No, and I'm glad you brought that up, is understanding who just like you're selling a product or your service, who would be the best candidate to see the potential that I could get the highest dollar out of, and if it's something that you care about, carry on the legacy of the business. So if we could sum this up, because we've given everybody a lot of information today, or you've given everybody a lot of information today. They want to sell their business. They're ready to retire. They don't have anybody they want to hand it off to. What are the first three things, or the top three things that they need to do, that they can do today, or they can start to do today? They're not going to finish it today. They can start to do today or this week to increase the valuation of their business.
Okay. So number one is enhance the quality of your data. So whatever you're using for reporting, not just your financial reporting, but like what allows you to understand how your business is performing, that part's critical. In my own business, that is a challenge on a regular basis as we're evolving what we're going to sell, right? So you can't just kind of stick to one way. You got to be maintaining a contemporary. So the quality of your data that you have is critical. The second one that I'd really go and put in is understand the demand for what you are going and selling, and what would change it, increase it, decrease it, and then why your company is going to be able to take advantage of the increase better than the typical company. Or if there's a decrease, why you're able to be a hedge against suffering at the same pace.
So that's where understanding what your competitive advantage and what makes your business successful is really, really important with that step. Okay.
Yeah.
Understood.
And then the third one that I would go and put in is, why do you get bought? If you can't articulate why you get bought, that's so critical. And that's different from why people buy your types of products and services. Why is it that they could have gone and spent, that $3,000 per year subscription with somebody else, but they bought it from you? They could have gone and bought that, $600 piece of equipment from somebody else, but they bought it from you. They could be buying, I don't know, $100 worth of takeout coffee per month, but for some reason you're getting $70 of that wallet every month. Why is it coming to you? So if you can explain the why of your business and are able to kind of translate it to financial results, and why somebody who buys it is able to keep that why forward, right? If you can articulate how they can protect and increase the value of what they've just got and bought, now you're reducing the risk to the buyer. You're increasing the confidence that they're getting something that they'll be able to take to the next level, or they'll be able to nurture. And I'll kind of tell, like, those I would say are my top three. And what I'll also go and add is I want to add like one narrative piece here that I think is very critical. You also got to understand why your company is being bought. And you may have just gone and built like a really nice, I don't know, say $10, $12 million per year revenue business. It's been relatively flat, just does an exceptional job. And the value of your business is don't mess it up, and it's going to continue to print money. And you're not even selling it because it can be 2-3 times larger. You're selling it because it's so good at making the money the way it is. And that's the value proposition. Yeah, you could go and buy another $10 or $12 million business, but you're not going to be as confident in it being able to continue to make money the way my business has gone. And that in its own right is worth a lot, right? Risk reduction, confidence boosting, is you got to be able to articulate that.
And that aspect, the last few points that you made, it's I would say it's really important to bring in that third party perspective, because especially if you're the founder and you've been here in the business for 5, 10, 15, 20 years plus, more than that, you get blinded to some of the things. Again, it's just kind of this is just the way we do things. We've slowly been improving these things, and it's just the way it is, right? And getting that, you had a great example previously of the reason that people come to us and the reason that we're so successful is because of our customer service. This is just the way we did things. This is because we believed in hiring and developing people and treating people right. And that's in comparison to the market, that was our competitive advantage. And so some people are blind to that because just the way they did it. So I think that's brilliant, my friend. And we talked about a few things before we hit record. And this is a question I always ask people at the end of our podcast. But for you, Edgar, what is the next summit that you're chasing? What is the next big thing that you're going after? What is the next cool thing that you're trying to achieve right now?
Great question. I'd say from my perspective is to really kind of, I'd say, break out of the shackles of how we used to generate value in our society through business previously. We kind of gone and talked about, like there was like the merchants era hundreds of years ago when people would be shipping stuff from India to Europe and stuff like that. And then we had our industrial era, we have like this information era. But I think where we are, but all of those eras needed to go and have a contemporary understanding of how value is generated. And I think we're still stuck to practices that are 100 years old. Like, look at our basic accounting fundamentals. They're from 140 years ago. But then you go, and all of those were back when like you had like physical buildings and physical machinery, and labor really wasn't very valuable. And that's the basis of how we go and drive value. So my next summit is to go and just take what we've gone and talked about and have that be the start of the conversations. Like I actually don't want what we're talking about here to sound unusual. This should be the norm of what we're going and talking about in terms of value. So, I've helped contribute to an American standard called intellectual capital in the boardroom. And what that is how do you, as the board of the company, and look, by the way, if you're the founder of the company, you're on the board, right? Like you are the board, right? But it's like, how do you understand, like, where does future value and risk come from? Like, what are the things that you've done in the past that are going to continue to add value into the future? What are the things that you've done in the past that were valuable in the past that you should actually let go of or potentially just stop doing because it's no longer adding value? And I think that's kind of like the trap that is there for a lot of organizations, is that they want to hold on to the success of their business from the past rather than building into the success that the business needs in the future. So my summit is to kind of get organizations, I think, just get the way that our business environment generally thinks about this to the next level, and really just amplify this. We've spent years doing the validation for a concept that we called winnable addressable market, which is what is the share of the market that is valuable to you, that wants to that you want to sell to, and also wants to buy from you. And if that can become like the guide by how businesses are built, then you're not going to go and have this garbage of like, hey, Zach, give me $50,000 and I'll go and get you, 200,000 consumers that are going to come to your website and click and might be buying something, etc. Or if you're in business to business, I'll go and get you, 1,200 local leads of people who are going to go and buy your HVAC service and stuff like that. Like, it's bringing back the humanity to building a business. That's kind of what my aspiration is. So if that concept of winnable addressable market, of really tailoring your business towards serving those who are best served by you, if that becomes kind of like the kind of the starting point for how business strategy and how companies are built, that is kind of the summit that I'm climbing for, I suspect, decades.
No, and that was a great, I want to say segue, but that was a great to go watch what will be this last week's podcast with marketing experts, best-selling author of the one-page marketing plan. He's going to be he's on the podcast last week. He has a very his concept of capturing market share and identifying your ICP, as they say, leads right into that. So I love that this is at the end. I love that's the point that you made. Now go watch that podcast next, because that'll lead right into it, and it'll show you kind of what that could mean from, or what that looks like from a marketer's perspective. So that was brilliant, Edgar. Brilliant. I couldn't have scripted that any better myself.
Hey, it's a pleasure. If I've kind of had people think better, I love being the person, and I've had this happen, which I'm not making it up. I love this. Like, I love having people kind of go and say, it was like 1:30 in the morning, and I couldn't stop thinking about this thing because of conversation we had or something you went and said, and it added value to them. Like, I'm like, yes, like I'm like, I've done that. So I hope I've done that for some of the people listening to the podcast today, from just having you think differently about what makes your business and the blood, sweat, and tears, and unrecognized efforts that you've got to put into the company that you built.
No, absolutely. I mean, there's so many business owners that have done exactly what you just said, blood, sweat, and tears for years. They've went through so many ups and downs. Like, don't even get me started on this thing that we called COVID, how the stuff that you had to overcome, what you've had to push through, the changes that have been made, and the changes are happening quicker and quicker. You owe it to yourself to set your business up to give back to you as much as possible. So, and Edgar you did a wonderful job giving people a great, I don't even want to say start. I mean, this is a great, first few steps that I think that we've given them. And I'm going to leave all of his links in the description below. Edgar, where do you prefer people reach out to you?
I'm probably best on LinkedIn. So just add me on that. Or you can just send me an email as well. It's edgar@avasta.co, not com.co. And I'll be happy to kind of answer a question that you have and give you some perspective in terms of what you're going and dealing with. And thank you, Zach, for having me be part of this and introduce what I hope is going to go and add an extra couple of points of multiple for when you go and sell.
Absolutely. And we'll put all of his links in the description below. Thank you again very much, Edgar. I can't wait for this one to come out and to provide all this value for a lot of people. But until next time, everybody, thank you for being here, and keep chasing your next summit.